my talk should center around the studies on social protection for informal economy in Namibia. So in order to do that, we were able to map some of the studies or the known studies on the subject matter in the country. And this is what we came about. But before I begin to speak about them, I think it's worth to explain a little bit on how the topic of informality and social protection is appreciated in public discourse, and also how it is appreciated by those who plan and make policy. Informality for a very long time has been on the backseat of public discourse. And it being on the backseat of the public discourse, a situation has actually created a perception that there was no informality in the country. And this perception has disadvantaged those that operate and those that work in this particular sector in various ways. I can refer you or point you to all the national development plans of the nation and explore whether you would find something related to informality, if not SME, and the SME with an M at the beginning. Now, that in itself is a problem because the SME is supposed to be an avenue of graduation where you graduate to after having been a vendor. So the result then has been that the whole informal economy ended up being misunderstood and wrongly perceived. Some of the perceptions were highlighted earlier during the day with regard to issues of tax, with tax contribution, with regard to benefits. But I think this conference at the end of the day should be able to give us an idea as to how we approach this matter, and that is from the perspective of trade unions, that's from the perspective of government, that is from the perspective of business and civil society actors, as to how this issue is supposed to be engaged with. One of the scenarios one can look at is to say trade unions in Namibia already from the mid-90s started to experience loss of membership. And they could not quite really understand as to why they were losing their membership. And it really took long before the first study was commissioned, or not commissioned, but the first study happened around 2006, which was done in collaboration with the FES and the Labour Resource and Research Institute, which actually ended up creating a very good document on how to organize in times where it hasn't yet been explicitly said that there is a high level of informality, but to organize in terms when those that are working in formal labor, their numbers were decreasing. But then it was very important to consider when there was a decrease, where were the other people going to? And that is how the study on how to organize in the informal economy sector came about. Now, when this study also came about, trade unions did not appreciate this outcome very well for them to already grasp the issue at the time. So I'm sketching that scenario in relation to the creation of the Social Security Commission, the law that came into being in 1994, to say that its creation had one particular focus, And that was, the focus was for those that are employed largely in private sector, but that was large and formal, the state as the largest employer at the time. So that's why, for instance, aspects of social protection were limited amongst those that were employed as such and those that were organized as such. So that's why those that were informally employed would not even benefit from these discussions, especially in terms of when people were discussing the benefits of maternity, the benefits of being injured at work, and so on. So these two scenarios, one can look into them and say that actually this is why there seemed to have been a perception that informality was a non-issue in Namibia. But informality has been around, and we can contextualize it, or we can historicize it, and actually realize that it has already been there and it continues to be there. And I think the most important thing is that is the realization the government is beginning to get now that actually informality is increasing significantly. Because when you look at the time when the labor force survey for the first time had a module on informality, they were for the first time, and this is in the 2000s, after 2010, they were able to quantify people that were informally employed compared to before, when the Ministry of Labor, for instance, was doing labor force surveys then. So, this study was then, this 2006 study was informed by the first two studies of the government. The first one in 1994 on the character of the informal economy in the country, followed by the one that happened in 2001. Now, the one that happened in 2001 had clear objectives. And I think this is what we're talking about today, to say the objectives was to bring about up-to-date information that will assist planning and development of inclusive policies for those that are employed in the informal economy sector and for those that works, that operates in the informal economy sector. However, unfortunately, this report, which is a very good one, by the way, was not, the recommendations thereof were not effected. And I think, Comrade Moderator, this is one of the issues we have to also look at, that we can have good policies, but if we do not have good implementation policies, it still, we still remain in the same place. Yes. Now, the Africa Labour Research Network did a bigger study of three sections of the continent. This study was titled Social Protection in Africa, where there was also a chapter on Namibia. And this book, or this publication, maps out the various social protection programs that exist in the identified countries. And this study was very large and wide, that it's still a very good source of reference if one is to really understand what is going on. Now, for instance, if we consider some aspects as they were illuminated on earlier by our friend from the Ministry of Poverty, one get a sense that some of these benefits, as was also stated earlier, one have to access them as a result of certain conditions. And I think the important question to ask is, why is it that they have to be accessed based on certain conditions? And I think the major issue here also becomes on how to fund these interventions. Of course, the study indicated that many of the African countries that largely relied on foreign funding, they may not, even if they wanted to extend social protection to its citizens may not do it because of the limited limited resources. This publication I'm speaking about was published in 2012. Now, this was followed very shortly thereafter on another study in Namibia, also again through the Africa Labour Research Network, which focused on the subsector of taxi drivers. Now, the case study considered various areas of work, and the whole confusion that comes with it. For instance, by someone who owns a taxi and also drives it, by someone who owns a taxi and employs someone else, and how these people are supposed to access benefits as given as per the Social Security Act, for instance. But one thing that comes out of this study is that there was a serious need for coverage to be extended to the transport sector, to the taxi sector, because of the various things that happens, like whether it's accidents, loss of work, loss of income, and things like that. Because the issue is that you can devise these kinds of plans according to how you want them and according to how you can afford them. Now, there was also an assessment that was mentioned earlier in the morning by the International Labour Organization that assessed the various social protection flaws in Namibia. And this report was published in 2014. This report sets out a socioeconomic trajectory. It illuminates how things are. It also illuminates the gaps and the opportunities as well. Now, the report I mentioned earlier about the taxi drivers was a precursor for the two case studies, one which was done by the Ministry of Labour in conjunction with the Social Security Commission, and then the other one by TUCNA. The Namibian case study report illuminates the current character of the informal economy. Now, it was not a national survey, it was a case study. So various regions, 8 regions were selected, and they were surveyed. And some of the things that were considered, for instance, is to say how many people that were surveyed, for instance, owned a smartphone, and how can this smartphone be used to disseminate information that are of particular importance to them. Suppose the Social Security Commission devises a product which they want to market to this sector. What modalities should they have to put in place so that this product is well known? The baseline study by TUCNA also illuminate the various challenges that are experienced by workers that are considered vulnerable and those that are considered informal workers. But I think the issue here is to say, all these reports seem to suggest that there is a common understanding of what is happening now, but there is no sufficient discourse about the matter. Now, given the various social protection schemes that are available in Namibia, what difficult or easy questions should we continue to ask at this juncture? Various sentiments were said earlier in the morning on social protection being a right or social security being a right and how it should be accessed. But now we're getting a sense that the current discourse focuses more on how one should contribute in order to access this particular benefit. In his book titled Give a Man a Fish, James Ferguson educates us about new forms of distribution that are emerging across the global south, and it includes nations like Namibia, South Africa, Mexico, India, and Brazil. He illuminates or he demonstrates that there has been a steady expansion of paying cash grants to the poor in South Africa, specifically in Namibia. Now, in view of the fact that the current phase of the global capitalism, in view of the fact that the current phase of global capitalism has rendered a growing proportion of the populations in these nations chronically unemployed, many political activists have begun to question the assumption shared by both capitalists and Marxists that only waged workers had the right to share the social product. And I think this is very fundamental. And I'm going to return to it as I conclude. Ferguson further noted that many figures in the democratic tradition argued that social value is a value by society as a whole, that all members of society should be regarded as shareholders in a collective enterprise, and that everyone thus has the right to a share of the total social product. Quite tricky, right, when you look at it. In other words, what the question here, or the underlying issue is, why should people benefit only after contribution? Why can people not only benefit by virtue of belonging to a society that has a value in a particular social product? Now, the last report I would like to briefly speak about is called the Basic Needs Basket, which was published in 2014. This report is worth considering when we discuss access of social protection by informal workers. This report, the important finding of this report was that in order to live in Windhoek, one needed at least 9,600 Namibia dollars. And this survey was done on the underlying communities, west of the Western Bypass. And the question maybe government should begin to ask is, when we are saying that the poverty reduction has happened to a certain extent, which indicators is it really that we look at? Did we look at it in terms of financial gain? Or did you look at it also in terms of how society copes in that particular context? So I think this is also one of the reports worth considering. Now, in conclusion, I think we need to consider a sound and an implementable social policy so that social protection is not considered in context of desperation and destitution. But the social policy should be able to be implemented, and certain social goods must be derived not on condition of being destitute or being poor, but on condition of being a citizen. I think I end it there. Thank you very much.